There is a specific kind of exhaustion that you know intimately, yet find impossible to explain to those who do not carry your specific neurological architecture. It is not the fatigue of physical labor, nor is it the tiredness that comes from sleep deprivation. It is a deep, marrow-level depletion that strikes you precisely when you are surrounded by people. You walk into a room, perhaps a family gathering, a busy office, or a crowded train, and before a single word is exchanged, you feel a physical weight descend upon your chest. Your heart rate shifts, not out of nervousness, but out of a sudden, inexplicable synchronization with the hidden tension in the air. You may have entered that space feeling optimistic, light, and grounded, but within minutes, you are besieged by a sudden irritability, a wave of grief that does not belong to you, or a dark, simmering rage that seems to emanate from the walls themselves. You have likely spent years telling yourself that this is social anxiety. You have labeled yourself as oversensitive, introverted, or perhaps even emotionally unstable. You have learned to apologize for your sudden need to withdraw, to retreat into a dark room and lie in silence just to recalibrate your own vibration. But what if I told you that this diagnosis is fundamentally wrong? What if the crushing weight you feel is not a defect in your character, but a malfunction in your defense mechanisms caused by a cognitive superpower you have not yet learned to control? This phenomenon is what I call the Psychic Osmosis Trap. It is the state where the boundaries of the ego dissolve involuntarily, allowing the external emotional environment to flood your internal landscape without filtration. Carl Jung, the father of analytical psychology, spent decades studying the borderline states of human consciousness. He identified that individuals who possess high degrees of intuition, what we now casually call empaths, are not merely observant. They are participating in a primordial form of communication that predates language. Jung called this participation mystique, a term he borrowed from anthropology to describe a state where the subject and object are not distinct, where the observer becomes the observed. In the modern world, we treat this as a disorder. We medicate it. We try to numb it. But Jung realized that this permeability was actually the precursor to the highest form of human evolution, individuation. However, without the proper psychological framework, this gift behaves exactly like a curse. To understand why you feel like you are bleeding out energetically, we must look at the intersection where Jung's mysticism meets the cold, hard facts of modern neuroscience. When you interact with another human being, your brain is not merely processing their words. Your prefrontal cortex is engaged, yes, but deep within the brain, the mirror neuron system is firing. These neurons are the biological basis for empathy. When you see someone cry, your mirror neurons fire in the exact same pattern as if you were crying. Your brain simulates their pain to understand it. For the average person, this simulation is faint, a whisper. But for you, the volume is turned up to a deafening roar. Your mirror neuron system is hyperactive. You do not just simulate the emotion, you embody it. Your cortisol levels spike when you are near a stressed person. Your dopamine crashes when you are near a depressed person. You are biologically hijacked by the neurochemistry of those around you. This is what I categorize as involuntary neuro-somatic resonance. You are not imagining their feelings, your body is physically replicating their hormonal state. But here is where it gets darker, and where Jung's insights become crucial for your survival. Jung argued that we do not just pick up on the surface emotions, the fake smiles and the polite pleasantries. He believed that the intuitive mind peers directly into the shadow. The shadow consists of the repressed, dark, and unacceptable parts of the human psyche that a person hides from the world and, more importantly, from themselves. When you stand in front of someone who is smiling but secretly harboring deep resentment or malice, the average person sees only the smile. You, however, feel the nausea of the lie. You sense the dissonance. Because your involuntary neurosomatic resonance is bypassing the persona, the mask they wear, and connecting directly with their suppressed unconscious. You are feeling the rage they refuse to feel. You are carrying the grief they have buried. And because they are unaware of it, and you are unaware of the mechanism, you assume these feelings are yours. You confuse the intruder with the host. This is the great tragedy of the modern empath. You are acting as a psychic garbage disposal for the unprocessed trauma of everyone you encounter. This leads to a state of chronic inflammation, both of the body and the psyche. You withdraw not because you dislike people, but because you are suffering from systemic archetypal overload. Your psyche is crowded with the ghosts of other people's lives. Jung warned that if one remains in this state of unconscious absorption, the result is psychic inflation, or a total collapse of the ego. You become fragmented, moody, and volatile, mimicking the chaos you have absorbed. However, Jung also provided the map out of this labyrinth. He believed that the sensitivity that is currently destroying you is the raw material for constructing an impenetrable psychological armor. It is not about building walls to shut the world out. That leads to isolation and bitterness. It is about a radical alchemical transformation of how you process the data your senses are receiving. It requires moving from being a sponge to becoming a mirror. The difference between a sponge and a mirror is that a sponge retains what it touches, becoming heavy, soggy, and saturated. A mirror reflects the image perfectly, with absolute clarity, yet remains completely unaffected by the reflection it holds. The mirror does not say, "I am the image." The mirror says, "I see the image." This shift is what we will define as the observer protocol. To enact this protocol, we must first look at the specific trap you fall into. It usually begins in childhood. Jung noted that children often act as the symptom bearers for the family unit. If the parents are repressing conflict, the sensitive child will act out that conflict. You likely learned very early on that your safety depended on reading the emotional weather of the room. You developed hyper-vigilant scanning as a survival mechanism. You learned to detect the micro-tremors in your mother's voice or the heavy footsteps of your father before he even entered the room. This wiring was useful then. It kept you safe. But now, as an adult, this scanner is stuck in the on position. You are walking through a shopping mall or a workplace, scanning for threats that do not exist, decoding the unconscious signals of strangers who have no impact on your life. Your brain is burning through glucose at an accelerated rate, trying to solve the emotional puzzles of random passers-by. This is why you are tired. You are running a marathon of emotional computation every single day. Jung's concept of the persona, the mask we wear to interact with society, is often viewed as something fake or negative. But Jung argued that a healthy persona is essential. It is a shield. The problem is that the empath often has a porous persona, or no persona at all. You walk into the world skinless, exposing your raw nerve endings to the harsh winds of the collective unconscious. You believe that being authentic means being open to everything. This is a dangerous misconception. True authenticity requires a container. Without a vessel, the water spills and is lost to the earth. To begin the process of sealing the vessel, we must examine the specific types of parasitic energies you are most prone to absorbing, because not all empaths are vulnerable to the same things. Jung often spoke of archetypes, universal patterns of behavior. There are specific archetypal dynamics that hook into your specific wounds. You do not absorb everyone. You absorb the ones who trigger your dormant shadow contracts. These are the unhealed parts of yourself that magnetically attract the very people who will drain you the most. Let us look at a specific case to illustrate this mechanism. Jung often analyzed the dreams and neuroses of his patients to find where their boundaries had been breached. Imagine a patient. Let's call him Elias. Elias is a classic fixer. He is intelligent, compassionate, and deeply intuitive. He works in a high-stress corporate environment. Every day, Elias comes home feeling a profound sense of inadequacy and anxiety, despite being a top performer. He assumes he is suffering from imposter syndrome. However, upon closer inspection, it becomes clear that Elias sits next to a colleague who is outwardly charming, but inwardly consumed by jealousy and a fear of failure. Elias, possessing high neurosomatic resonance, is literally processing his colleague's fear of failure for him. The colleague goes home feeling lighter, having projected his anxiety outward. Elias goes home carrying a burden that is not his. Elias has fallen victim to projective identification, a defense mechanism where one person forces their unacceptable feelings into another. Because Elias has a wound regarding his own self-worth, the hook catches. He accepts the projection. He identifies with it. He thinks, "I am anxious," instead of, "I am perceiving anxiety." This distinction is the key to invulnerability. As long as you believe the feeling is yours, you are trapped in it. The moment you can label it as external data, the spell begins to break. But recognizing it is only the first step. You must understand the biology of why you can't just let it go. Your brain has forged a neural pathway that equates feeling the other with safety or love. To stop absorbing pain feels, to the primitive parts of your brain, like an act of betrayal or a risk of abandonment. You are fighting against your own evolutionary programming. This is why standard advice like "just ignore them" fails. You cannot ignore a biological imperative. You must overwrite it. This overwriting process begins with a ruthless categorization of your symptoms. Jung did not believe in vague spirituality. He was a scientist of the soul. He understood that you cannot cure a pathology until you have isolated it. We must dissect your suffering into distinct stages, for what you call feeling too much is actually a progressive degeneration of the psychic immune system. Through my analysis of the empathic psyche, I have identified the 3 stages of empathic decay. You must identify where you stand on this spectrum before the damage becomes irreversible. The first stage is what I call the somatic echo. This is the physical manifestation of the psychic breach. At this stage, your mirror neurons are so overactive that they are sending error signals to your autonomic nervous system. You do not just know your friend is sick. You develop a migraine when you speak to them. You feel nausea when you watch the news. Your body is treating external observation as internal injury. This is the vagus nerve rebellion. Your body is screaming at you to separate, but because your mind interprets this as caring, you lean in closer. You ignore the biological alarm, forcing your system to operate in a state of high alert sympathy. Over time, this leads to autoimmune issues, chronic fatigue, and a mysterious lethargy that sleep cannot cure. Your biology is literally being eroded by your refusal to erect a psychological border. If ignored, you descend into the second stage, the shadow infection. This is the most dangerous phase for your sanity. Here, you cease to be a mere observer of pain and become a container for it. You begin to act out the repressed emotions of those around you. You might find yourself suddenly furious at a partner for a reason you cannot articulate, only to realize later that they were the ones suppressing rage, and you merely gave it a voice. You become the archetypal scapegoat. In group settings, you are the one who ruins the vibe by bringing up the uncomfortable truth, or you become the hysterical one, weeping the tears the stoic family members refuse to shed. You are not just carrying their baggage, you are unpacking it and wearing their clothes. You have allowed the psychic osmosis to reach the core of your identity. You believe you are unstable, volatile, and broken, when in reality, you are simply the only person in the room honest enough to feel the atmospheric pressure. The final stage is systemic ego collapse. This is the state of total numbness. It is the paradox of the empath. You have felt so much for so long that you burn out the neural receptors responsible for connection. You enter a state of dissociative apathy. You isolate completely. You cut off friends, family, and the world, retreating into a fortress of silence. Jung warned of this, the retreat into the unconscious. You become like a dragon guarding a cave, terrified that a single visitor will steal your remaining life force. This is not peace, it is a coma. It is a defense mechanism gone rogue, where the walls you built to protect yourself have become a prison cell. If you recognize yourself in these descriptions, do not panic. The fact that you are aware of the collapse is the proof that the observer is still alive. Now, we must initiate the counter protocol. We must turn you from the victim to the alchemist. Jung's solution to this dilemma is found in the concept of individuation, the process of becoming a distinct, undivided whole. For the empath, individuation requires a radical act of cognitive decoupling. You must learn to separate yourself from the collective. This is not about ceasing to care, it is about ceasing to carry. We begin with a technique I call the visual interruption. Modern neuroscience tells us that the brain prioritizes visual data. When you feel the onset of an external emotion, that sudden wave of anxiety or heaviness, you must immediately visualize a barrier. But not just any barrier. Jung utilized the power of symbols. You must construct a symbolic totem of separation. Imagine you are speaking to someone who is draining you. You feel the neurosomatic resonance kicking in. Your chest tightens. Immediately, in your mind's eye, visualize a sheet of thick, clear glass descending between you and them. This is not a wall of rejection, it is a laboratory observation window. You can see them perfectly. You can hear them clearly. You can offer them compassion. But their virus cannot pass through the glass. You are observing the specimen, not becoming it. By holding this image, you send a signal to your prefrontal cortex. I am safe. I am separate. This is data, not danger. You will feel your cortisol levels stabilize. You have engaged the observer self. But visualization is only the first step. You must also change your internal dialogue using linguistic alchemy. We spoke earlier of the danger of saying, I am anxious. You must aggressively reframe your internal language. When the feeling hits, you must say, I am sensing anxiety. Or better yet, use the diagnostic framework. I am detecting a high level of repressed grief in this environment. Do you see the shift? The first statement, I am anxious, accepts the emotion as your identity. It triggers the fight or flight response. The second statement, I am detecting, positions you as the scientist. It engages your analytical brain, dampening the limbic system's fire. You move from the sufferer to the sage. You are no longer drowning in the ocean, you are the captain of the ship, noting the turbulence of the waves without jumping into the water. This practice leads to the development of what Jung called the mana personality, a being of power and influence. But here, we must be careful. As you gain control over this superpower, you will face a new temptation, the savior complex. Once you stop drowning in other people's emotions, you will have the clarity to fix them. You will see their traumas more clearly than they do. You will see the solutions to their problems. You will feel a compulsion to intervene, to heal, to save. You must resist this with every fiber of your being. This is the trap of the unconscious healer. Jung was very clear. You cannot help someone who has not asked for help, and you cannot wake someone who is pretending to be asleep. If you use your newfound energy to try and fix the people who drained you, you are merely re-entering the cycle of abuse under the guise of benevolence. You are feeding your own ego's need to be needed. Instead, you must redirect that energy inward. This is the principle of recirculation. All that intense, high-definition emotional data you perceive, use it to understand yourself. Why does this person's anger trigger you? What part of your shadow does it reflect? If you are triggered by a narcissist, it is because you have not yet integrated your own capacity for selfishness. If you are drained by a victim, it is because you have not yet accepted your own helplessness. Every person who drains you is a mirror showing you a hole in your own armor. Do not try to fix the mirror, fix the hole. This is the hard work of shadow integration. It requires you to look at the parts of yourself that are ugly, weak, and selfish. The empath often identifies as the good one, the giver, the light. This identification is a limitation. To be truly invulnerable, you must accept that you are capable of everything you despise in others. You are capable of cruelty. You are capable of indifference. You are capable of destruction. When you accept that the monster is also within you, you no longer fear the monsters outside of you. They lose their power to shock or drain you because you recognize the frequency. You simply nod and say, "Ah, I know that demon. He lives in my basement too. I keep him fed so he doesn't scratch at the door." This is true immunity. Not innocence, but wholeness. As you practice this cognitive decoupling and shadow integration, you will notice a strange phenomenon. People will begin to react to you differently. The energy vampires, finding no hooks for their tentacles, will simply drift away. They will find you boring or cold. Let them go. This is the pruning of the dead wood. Meanwhile, those who are genuinely seeking growth, who are ready to take responsibility for their own emotions, will be drawn to your stability. You will become a lighthouse rather than a lifeboat. A lighthouse stands firm on the rock, shining a light for ships to navigate their own way. It does not jump into the water to row the boats for them. This transition is not easy. It requires you to kill the version of yourself that needed to be a martyr to feel valuable. It requires you to withstand the guilt of saying no. It requires you to tolerate the discomfort of other people's disappointment. But the reward is the return of your own soul. You will find that your energy returns, the mysterious fatigue vanishes. Your creativity explodes because the energy that was being used to process everyone else's trash is now fueling your own engine. You enter a state of psychic sovereignty. But there is one final cosmic implication to this transformation. Jung believed that the evolution of the individual affects the evolution of the collective. By refusing to participate in the unconscious emotional contagion of the herd, you are inserting a break in the chain of trauma. When you stand in a room full of fear and refuse to be afraid, you act as a grounding rod. You lower the emotional temperature of the entire room without saying a word. You do not need to do anything. Your very presence, anchored in the observer self, harmonizes the environment. This is the true purpose of the empath. You are not here to suffer, you are here to transmute. You are a biological filtration system for the collective unconscious. But a filter that is clogged is useless.